What's your like favorite Star Wars concept that like because I'm still
concept?
Like, every once in a while I'll look into like Star Wars explained lore videos and stuff like that. And as I've been playing Fallen Order, like bits and pieces I've fallen off pretty considerably, but like they've introduced some concepts where I'm just like, that's dope, and I should look into that more, into the Star Wars.
Well, what I always like, what I like about Star Wars, and what I think is the secret to Star Wars success, and I've been thinking a lot more about this lately, and I've been applying it to kind of everything I've been thinking about with Star Wars, is this idea that what makes Star Wars work is that it's, and this is no secret, it wears its influences on its sleeves. You know, like the original Star Wars is clearly inspired by the war movies of its time, the samurai movies and westerns that Lucas grew up with, along with the serialized storytelling as well. And what makes things like Fallen Order work is that they take so lovingly from Dark Souls, Uncharted, all these other things. Mandalorian, same situation. It works because it is a Western and a samurai thing. And what I think worked the least about the sequel trilogy is, rather than taking from those influences and finding other ones, it instead just takes directly from Star Wars. Not entirely, but overall, you know, it's rather than referencing the same things that the original trilogy and the prequels referenced, all it does is reference the original trilogy and to some extent the prequels.
So like, how do you think it would, if they were to reflect like modernity, like how do you think they would have changed?
Well, I mean, we can talk more about this, but there's rumors that Taika Waititi could direct a Star Wars movie. They've at least approached him, it seems. That's the current report. And I just wrote an article the other day for CBR talking about why he's such a great choice for it. And go check that out. Give me some page views. But the main point I say in that is essentially that... again, that point that Star Wars is this balance of all these different influences, and Taika Waititi is a filmmaker who can handle that balance, and while also bringing his own touch to it. You know, so much of his projects handle different tones and genres, all pretty well and pretty evenly, and we see that even in his season finale to The Mandalorian, which has that comedic scene at the beginning, but also has some of the best action in the series, and then, you know, these fantastic elements with Baby Yoda and all this other stuff. And what I think a modern Star Wars movie should do is, frankly, my favorite Star Wars movie is Rogue One. And what I think that movie does well, and it's definitely my favorite of the Disney era, it's not in the sequel trilogy, but and what I think that movie does so well is it's the only Star Wars movie that's an actual war movie, in my opinion, except for maybe A New Hope, but even then... You're not following someone who's in the war. You're following or has been affected by the war. Direct. I mean, other than
he was about to join the Empire, right?
I mean, you know, it definitely comments on the war in the sense that like he was totally willing to join the Imperial military just to get off of his planet, which is something that's like real life. You know, people will join the military just to get out of the situation they're in and not really think about what that might, you know, what that implies and what that effect is, and it's an understandable thing, while also it's a complicated issue. But Rogue One is the only one that actually deals with the fallout of the war on a personal level, because you have characters like Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor who their lives have been completely torn apart by the war. It's not like, again, Luke Skywalker, who, other than, of course, you know, his dad being Anakin, in the context of that movie, he's just a farm boy who's, you know, light years away from the actual effects of the war. But again, the reason I think Rogue One is a good example of what modern Star Wars can be is that it takes on new tones. It goes back to it takes on a tone that we have seen in Star Wars, but it kind of commits to it more, like the much more serious war tone and all that, while it still is faithful to the spirituality and the Force and that aspect of Star Wars. It's still completely there, even though there's no Jedi. And
no lightsaber until the very, very end, right?
Exactly. And it's Vader. It's not like a Jedi swoops in and saves them or anything. But it goes back to not just the original influences that was those older war movies that influenced Lucas, but it also takes from, like, people have pointed out, they, like, especially when it was being marketed, it was like, oh, this is going to be like the Saving Private Ryan of Star Wars. This is going to be the
like, you know, boots on the ground. Like, exactly, they had the shot of the walkers. I keep getting the AT-ATs and AT-STs mixed up, but
well, the AT-ATs are the big ones, the really big ones.
Okay, then I think it was the AT-ATs with, like, the just beautiful orange sunset in, like...
the Apocalypse Now shot, essentially.
Yeah, like, oh my goodness. Like...
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it pulls from... Well, that's one of Lucas's contemporaries, so Lucas couldn't have necessarily been directly inspired by him. I mean, obviously... He was inspired by movies of that time, but I don't know which came first, and he was probably already working on Star Wars. But it's that same... Rogue One goes back to the original influences, and then also pulls from more modern ones, and it creates this... What makes Star Wars great is this big hodgepodge of everything that is... Like, of all these different things that... anyone can find something in it that they enjoy. Maybe you don't like the Jedi and the Sith and the Force, but you're a fan of the bounty hunting, and maybe you don't like, you know, the action part of it, but you've got these fun, quirky characters at the same time. And Rogue One even has that with K2SO is like the snarky, sarcastic droid.
Who's awesome.
And, you know, and Chirrut and Baze have like a fun dynamic. They're almost like the human C-3PO and R2. You know, Baze is kind of like the quiet, more resourceful one, and Chirrut's sort of like the talkative, not necessarily sarcastic or snarky, but he's got a bit more of a sense of humor to him, and self-awareness, rather. And they kind of play those roles while also still being, you know, badasses in their own right. So I think for what I want to see the Star Wars films at least do, because I think the games and the TV shows, which we'll talk about, are already doing really well, is I just want the movies to continue to push forward by looking back and not looking back on Star Wars. That's the main thing, is don't just look back at Star Wars and try to do more Star Wars, you know, like it's as simple as how the Marvel movies have continued to do well by pulling from the comics, while still acknowledging their own history. You know, you don't want to necessarily retread things, but you also want to provide that feel that was there at the beginning and has been there the whole way through. You know, I mean, Force Awakens is the most slave to the Star Wars mythos and previous movies, and yet it has the fun. It feels like Star Wars in that way, but it doesn't feel like new Star Wars. It feels like completely just more of the same. You know, I don't just necessarily agree with the concept that it's a complete remake of A New Hope, because there's enough plot points that are different, but it's clear that they were playing it safe, and I think that was part of the intention. What I want to see them do is go off, you know, 1,000 years in the future, 1,000 years in the past, or just explore areas we haven't seen before, and what will make it feel like Star Wars is that it will be pulling from those same influences, you know? Like, we can get a, like, Sith-Jedi war from 1,000 years ago, similar to Knights of the Old Republic, and have it feel like, you know, I mean, like a samurai war movie rather than Rogue One, which feels like this like boots on the ground, like Saving Private Ryan, more modern war story. And if we can get both, then Star Wars will be satisfying the wider group of people rather than trying to either appeal directly to the fans or to do something so different that it doesn't feel, quote unquote, feel like Star Wars. And that's the main issue, is that everyone wants it to feel like Star Wars, but no one has the same definition of that. You know,
I mean, I think, what is it called? I think it was BDG, but it was a Polygon video a while ago that kind of was discussing like what makes a good Star Wars anything, and like what makes something feel like Star Wars, and in the context of like Fallen Order. Like with I feel like sound is definitely a really big deal. They brought up the fact that like just random bottomless pits everywhere. Because Star Wars, and I'm just like, that makes sense. So now I'm kind of looking out for like not anytime there's a bottomless pit, I'm just like, okay, like they did it, and like weird trash compactors and scary, like there should be some like animals everywhere for no reason, like everywhere for no reason. I don't know.
I think it's the everything goes mentality, and I think that's part of the problem with the current and it's not necessarily no rules. Like, you want some consistency, but it's it's the big issue I have is people talking about how logically none of the new Star Wars movies make sense and all this stuff. And there's definitely a feeling of discontinuity, but I don't think the solution is strict continuity. Like, again, Star Wars is a bit of everything, so therefore anything should be able to go. You know, you have to put in some effort to get it to feel right, you know? I mean, the continuity is fun, the lore is fun, and you want to, like, have things tie into each other because of that. But you also want to give storytellers the freedom, and it's, like you're saying, like, the planet designs, the ship designs all have these random bottomless pits and, you know, different things that serve the purpose when they need to be there. They don't really necessarily make sense, but they're there because the story needs them to be there. And that's really the entire, like, that's really how the Force works in Star Wars, is that it gets the character from point A to point B. You know, sometimes it's literally like Luke Skywalker needs his lightsaber right now, but it's 5 feet away from him. The Force gets it to him, you know? It's not that he has telekinesis. It's that the Force is, like, being like, you need this right now, and I'm giving it to you, you know?
That's
like,
a good way to look at it,
and it's the same thing with Rise of Skywalker, and this stuff is also present in Empire and a couple of the other ones. The whole idea that you can kind of, like, sense the feelings of your friends and loved ones and other Force-sensitive people from across the galaxy, like Finn feeling when Rey dies, you know? Like, that's the story needing him and the character development needing him to know it happens. And it wouldn't work in, you know, any other movie to just have someone randomly go like, oh, I could feel that. But in Star Wars, it works because, you know, like, the Force is there to kind of just put things in the place they need to be. So I want to see more of that, you know, just give us a different setting, give us a different tone, and especially when it comes to things like the video games, like, just apply that Star Wars skin to things we already love. You know, I think that's the way to go. So that's my long-winded overall thoughts.
I've been... Like, I agree with all of that. I'm just trying to think if there was anything that I could add that wouldn't just